Hello? Last time, although it was a bit embarrassing, I shared my personal life and how my perspective on my children, and further, my perspective on life has changed. This time, in continuation of that, I will talk a bit more about acknowledging a child's disability. The first topic is related to raising siblings. Accepting and acknowledging a child's disability in a healthy way also applies to raising siblings. I have a first child who is a typical daughter. If my second child did not have a disability, I would have tried to raise both children to be successful individuals that I wouldn't be embarrassed to show anywhere. However, by accepting my child with a disability as they are, this attitude seemed to also apply to my first child. My first child is now about 30 years old and recently had an interview at the elementary school they graduated from. It was a graduate interview, and I remember something they said during that time. They said this: "One of the things I am truly grateful to my parents for is that they respect me as a person. They really respected my thoughts when deciding what I like or what to do, and they supported me a lot to think independently." They spoke like this. As I listened to this, I felt grateful that although my first child is not a child who has succeeded in the world in a remarkable way, my child is thankful to their imperfect parents. I also think that if it weren't for the disability of my second child, I might not have been able to treat my first child in that way. Secondly, I believe that the sooner you accept it, the better. For parents to accept and acknowledge their child's disability in a healthy way is closely related to the child with the disability accepting and acknowledging their own disability in a healthy manner. It is also related to siblings accepting their disabled sibling and forming a healthy sense of identity. If parents feel ashamed of their child's disability, naturally, the child with the disability and their siblings will also feel ashamed of it. If the parents do not acknowledge it, it will be difficult for the child with the disability to acknowledge it as well. If parents do not feel ashamed of their child with a disability and accept them healthily, I believe that the child, although it may be difficult, will also accept their disability, and so will their siblings. One of the most frequent questions I receive is when to tell a child that they have a disability. It's a delicate topic, but if the child is not significantly aware of their disability, then acknowledging the disability is an issue solely for the parents. If the child is even slightly aware of their disability, I believe that discussions related to acknowledging the disability should start from a young age to avoid difficulties during adolescence. It may be difficult, but it is necessary to talk openly about it. Instead of saying that a disability is something bad or shameful, the conversation should focus on the fact that everyone is different and that acknowledging and living with one's shortcomings is the right value system. If you don't acknowledge it and try to have the conversation during adolescence, it becomes even more difficult. When a child with a disability reaches adolescence, it also becomes a time for them to think about their own identity. There are side effects that arise from the difference between how others see me and how I see myself. There are situations where difficulties arise due to the discrepancy between others seeing me as a person with a disability and me not considering myself as such. To receive government support, a diagnosis of disability is required and a medical certificate is needed, which cannot be hidden. In some cases, you shouldn't even mention the word disability in front of your children. To have a healthy identity, how I see myself and how others see me should be the same. As I mentioned before, I'm short, but if I were to think of myself as a tall, handsome actor, like saying I'm Jung Woo Sung, I wonder how people would perceive me. I would also wonder, how could people ignore someone as great as me? I would live thinking like that. Therefore, I need to accept that I am short and live with it. The third point is about comparisons. I think the reason I often struggle to acknowledge things might be because I compare myself to others. I have also blamed God a lot in my life. I believe it's okay to blame God. When you look at Psalms, Habakkuk, Jeremiah, Job, you see that many prayers are filled with complaints against God. And I realize that this is also a form of prayer. I believe that not only piety is prayer, but everything I pour out before the Lord is prayer. When I pray like that, the Lord sometimes remains silent, but also provides endless comfort in my heart. There are many people who are going through much harder times than I am, so my story might sound like a luxury to them. However, it's the same for me when I compare myself to someone better off than I am. If I compare myself to someone better than me, I can never be happy. To live a happy life, I believe it is about accepting the life given to me without comparison, or rather, without the concept of comparison at all, and doing my best in that situation. The problem is that, although everyone knows this well, it doesn't go as planned. However, when raising and acknowledging a child with disabilities, these aspects seem to become a part of life, leading to a much deeper realization. What I vaguely realized is that Even among families with disabilities, they sometimes compare each other. They talk about whose disability is more difficult or not. Of course, there are families that have it harder and those that have it easier. When children with disabilities participate in performances like plays or music recitals, showcasing what they've learned through programs, parents often feel proud or sometimes heartbroken about the roles their children take on. Therefore, I think it's great for our children to engage in group activities that they enjoy. But as a parent, I'm not entirely comfortable with putting them on stage just to show them off to others. The fourth point is about what kind of mindset parents should have towards their children with disabilities. In 2007, a book titled The Reason Why I Jump was published in Japan. The author featured here is a 13-year-old boy named Naoki Higashida. There was a time when NHK broadcasted this as a documentary, and in it you can see that this boy couldn't speak at all, would scream and jump a lot. This boy wrote this by typing with his hands. In it, the following words appear. It's okay for us to have a hard time. What is really difficult for us is that our parents struggled because of us. We are okay, so please don't be troubled, parents. There is also another message like this. What we want to ask of those who are with us all day is not to get stressed because of us. Doing so feels like denying the value of our lives, and it weakens the strength we need to fight. What is most difficult for us is the thought that we are causing sadness to others. We can endure our own hardships, but we cannot bear that our lives are the cause of others' unhappiness. I believe these words somewhat represent the feelings of our children. If I were to think or say that my life was ruined or became unhappy because of my child, I believe my child would feel much more pain about the family being unhappy due to their disability than about their own disability. Of course, I do not think that my life has become unhappy because of my child with a disability. Even though, from a worldly perspective, my life may not be considered very successful, I believe that my life has become much richer and my family is living a happy life because of my second child. I believe this in turn leads to the happiness of my second child. My child also still experiences stress due to their shortcomings, but I think that is a type of stress that everyone faces in daily life, albeit in different forms. So parents, please do not be too overwhelmed by having a child with a disability. That is what our children with disabilities hope for. And this is such an obvious thing to say, but it is truly about looking at your child with eyes of love. In my case, my perspective changed from viewing my child from a worldly standpoint to seeing them from the perspective of how God views me. Before the Lord, I am truly a person with autism. I believe that He always patiently guides me with love. I try to approach my child from that perspective. Throughout this session, I have been quite verbose. People who are good at YouTube say to upload short videos, but I have shared various life lessons I have learned while raising my child during my life's journey. The reason I have shared my story at such length is because the perspective, mindset, and attitude towards your child are more important than any therapeutic skills. This is like the most important foundation when building a house. No matter how good a house you build, if the foundation is weak, it is like building a house on sand. That foundation is about trying to understand your child more, genuinely loving your child from their perspective, and focusing on changing yourself rather than trying to fix your child. So far, many parts have been mentioned in a religious context, but I'm sharing this because the aspects of faith have been helpful in my life. Regardless of whether it is faith, philosophy, or meditation, I hope that the perspective of us, parents towards our children with disabilities, shifts from despair to a life of hope, benefiting both the family and the child. Thank you for watching today, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.